What is up, nutrition nerds? You know I love talking about the latest research and ways to race faster, and today is no different. We're going through a new study which suggests that hydrogels could be the better race nutrition for runners and triathletes. I've done a couple of videos around this topic before, including one where I've specifically talked about whether hydrogels are better than standard forms of carbohydrate supplements like gels or drinks during exercise. Previously, the results haven't been particularly favourable for hydrogels, but this new study suggests a different view. If you aren't sure of what hydrogels are, by the way, I'll give you a very quick run through before we get into the latest research. But it's technology that Maurten use in their nutrition products, and they sponsor athletes like Jan Frodeno and Eliud Kipchoge. So if you're new here, then hey, I'm James, I'm a sport nutritionist, and I do videos on all sorts of nutrition topics to help you train and race better. If that sounds good to you, then hit the subscribe button and the notification icon. Okay, so let's get into today's topic. We're going through a study by Rowe and his colleagues, which came out last year on the use of hydrogels on running performance. I'm going to walk you through this study, why they did it, what they found, and how it might be applicable to you as either a runner or triathlete or anyone else who's watching this video. If you've got any questions about this, as I go through it, then let me know in the comments and I'll get back to you. So first things first, I really love this study. There are studies which I read where I'm on the fence about them for whatever reason, but this wasn't one of them. It was a fantastic study and I'm so pleased to see it. Now, what was the point of it? There were actually a few reasons, but the overarching theme is that more investigation is needed into running performance and carbohydrate intake. Lots of the studies on carbohydrates and performance use cyclists, but it's well known that runners generally experience more gastrointestinal or GI upset when consuming nutrition. And actually, many runners are well below recommended sports guidance for carb intake for distance events like marathons or triathlons, so the researchers specifically wanted to use runners. This was also coupled with the advent of hydrogel technology becoming more prominent in sports nutrition, and it may offer a way to reduce GI symptoms and improve performance in runners. Now, a brief explanation on hydrogels. When a hydrogel solution is consumed, the idea is once in your stomach, it forms a jelly-like substance rather than just being a free sloshing liquid, which may help with GI symptoms and deliver carbohydrates more effectively to your intestines, which is where it gets absorbed. So the researchers designed a study where participants ran for 2 hours at 68% of their VO2 max, followed by a self-paced 5K time trial. Along with a familiarization protocol, they did this 3 times with 3 different conditions. In one, they consumed a drink with a hydrogel solution. In another, a non-hydrogel carb solution, essentially a liquid drink mix, and another with a placebo drink, as in there was nothing in it that would contribute to performance. Now, the carbohydrate drinks contained 180 grams of carbohydrates overall, with a makeup of 120 grams of glucose and 60 grams of fructose, so at a 2-to-1 ratio. They drank these mixtures over that first 2-hour run period. These drinks were taste matched, and the participants and the researchers were blinded to what drinks they were consuming. The participants were also blinded to their performance in the 5K time trials until they had completed all 3. Now, for the study itself, they recruited 11 well-trained male runners into the trial, all with very reasonable credentials. They had to have trained more than 4 times a week for the past 3 years, completed a marathon within the last 18 months under 240, or achieved a VO2 max above 60 milliliters per kilogram. So these were pretty decent athletes. Before and during testing, the researchers took blood samples for various different measurements, and the participants also ran with a mask on, which captured all sorts of data surrounding oxygen, carbon dioxide, and carbohydrate or fat metabolism. The athletes came in a fasted state for all the tests and had their initial bloods taken, then consumed 200 milliliters of their fluid immediately before starting their run protocol. Then, every 15 minutes, they had another 100 milliliters of fluid for the rest of the 2-hour period. Their gastrointestinal symptoms were also recorded every 30 minutes. Now, after the 2 hours at 68% of their VO2 max, they went straight into a self-paced 5K time trial. So, that's the overview of the study. So now let's talk about the results. Firstly, if you're interested in reading this study in more detail, then I've put a link in the description for you. I think it's always a good idea to look into this yourself and not listen to someone talk on YouTube about it like they know what they're talking about. Now we're going to run through the different results in a bit of an order to give you some context and then sum things up at the end. Okay, so let's start with substrate metabolism, and that's just a fancy way of saying the fuel we burn, and in this case it's fat and carbohydrates. This study had several key findings, which I'll summarise, and just stick with me here. So you know, these findings are what we call significant. That means that when they've been analysed in statistical software, they hit a certain threshold, which suggests that these are true differences and not just coincidence. Both carbohydrate groups had a higher proportion of carbohydrates contributing to overall energy expenditure compared to the placebo group. In conjunction with that, both carbohydrate groups had a lower amount of fat contributing to overall energy expenditure. Or if you look at it the other way, the placebo group used more fat for fuel compared to the carbohydrate groups. The hydrogel group had higher total carbohydrate oxidation compared to the non-hydrogel group. The hydrogel group had higher exogenous carbohydrate oxidation compared to the non-hydrogel group. Between the two carbohydrate groups, there was no difference in liver glucose oxidation or muscle glycogen oxidation. The total energy expenditure between the three groups was the same. Now we'll leave these up and I'll walk you through what all of this means because it's a lot of info, but it's some really great stuff from this study. To quickly explain some terms, oxidation is the word that you can interchange here with burn to keep things simple. Endogenous means the body's own supply and exogenous is from outside the body. So endogenous carbohydrates would be your glycogen stores and exogenous carbs would be from the drink. Now let's start with the finding that the energy expenditure was the same between the groups. That's super important because it gives you the ability to compare fat and carbohydrate contribution to energy on an even playing field. Next, the carbohydrate groups burned more carbohydrates than the placebo group, or the placebo group burned more fat than the carbohydrate group, whichever way you want to look at it. That tells you that the carbohydrate drinks were definitely doing something. They increased the overall amount of carbohydrates contributing to energy, and when compared to the placebo, it's essentially a control and it validates the whole premise. It's also important if we relate this to racing performance because it tells you that carbohydrate drinks do have an effect and influence what you use for fuel. Now, finally, let's look at three of these findings together, and these three are critical to understand. The hydrogel group had higher total carbohydrate oxidation and higher carbohydrate exogenous oxidation, and liver glucose oxidation and muscle glycogen oxidation remained the same. What this means is that those in the hydrogel group absorbed then burned more carbohydrates from the drink than the non-hydrogel drink, because we know that the total carbohydrates burned were more in the hydrogel group, and that wasn't because of liver or muscle contribution. So this is showing a clear difference, and actually they found that exogenous carbohydrate oxidation was up to 8.2% higher in the hydrogel group compared to the non-hydrogel group. And that is pretty impressive. Now, hopefully that makes sense to you. Watch it again if you need to, because we're going to move on to GI symptoms now. So GI symptoms are important, especially to pure runners and triathletes when considering the run leg. It's common to get things like GI upset, so cramps, bloating and diarrhea, and the theory is that hydrogels could improve that. The findings from this study were both hydrogel and placebo groups had significantly fewer GI symptoms compared to the non-hydrogel group. The hydrogel group had significantly more GI symptoms compared to the placebo group. What this means is that both the hydrogel and placebo drinks seem to be better for athletes when it came to GI symptoms. However, that placebo group was the best when it came to GI symptoms because it had fewer than the hydrogel group. This suggests that when it comes to GI discomfort, hydrogel is superior compared to non-hydrogel. And this is important because they also found correlation with time trial performance and GI symptoms. In the non-hydrogel group, there was a strong positive correlation between time trial performance and GI symptoms. That is, the less GI symptoms, the faster the athletes were. So that's important, and with that in mind, let's move on to the 5K time trial performance, shall we? The results for the time trial in the study were clear, and that was that both carbohydrate groups had a significantly better time trial result compared to the placebo group. However, the hydrogel group had a significantly better time compared to the non-hydrogel group, 2.1% better in fact. And remember, these are the same runners, they're just using different drinks. So in order of performance, it was hydrogel first, then the non-hydrogel group, and then the placebo group. And this says a couple of things. Firstly, and this is something that I always bang on about, and it probably gets a bit boring, but carbohydrates are king for performance. This is yet another study which clearly demonstrates this. The other thing that you can tell is that hydrogel seems to be better for performance compared to a non-hydrogel carbohydrate supplement. Now, this might be for two main reasons, or perhaps a combination of them, and they're things that we've already covered. It might be that the hydrogel format allowed the athletes to absorb more carbohydrates and then use them, and that directly contributed to a better performance. Or it might be that a reduction in gastrointestinal symptoms in the hydrogel group meant that they could perform better to the non-hydrogel group. Whatever it was, it seemed that hydrogels had some clear benefit in this study. However, that doesn't really agree with previous literature, and that's an important consideration. Why doesn't it? There's probably quite a few different reasons for this too, and I'm briefly going to cover them. Firstly, the test protocol was different to previous studies. Now, I would be inclined to say that this study was probably superior, but that's open to interpretation. Gut training might play a part as well. We know that you can train the gut to get better at taking carbohydrates. So what we need to test is whether athletes who regularly train their gut experience a similar sort of GI upset pattern seen in this study, or whether the benefits of hydrogel are diminished in those who already practice. It may also be because of the type of carbohydrates that they used as well. The researchers used glucose and fructose at a 2-to-1 ratio. Other studies used maltodextrin and fructose. And although maltodextrin essentially breaks down to glucose and it's the same at the end point, you might get differing rates of absorption or changes in how much fluid that you get in your intestines, and that could change the severity or frequency of GI symptoms. This 2-to-1 glucose-fructose ratio was actually something that I thought was a bit of a shame in this study, but it doesn't detract from how good it was overall. The reason I say that is because the main hydrogel sports supplement is made by Maurten, and they use a 1-to-0.8 ratio for maltodextrin to fructose. So we can't say that the results of this study specifically translate to Maurten products, and whether they are superior for everything that we've talked about in this video, but it gives a good idea. So I guess with that in mind, can we say that hydrogel products are definitively better than non-hydrogel products for racing? The answer here is no, as actually this is really the only study that suggests that they're better. It also doesn't include female athletes, so we have to be careful of generalization here. However, it is a brilliant study, and it paves the way for future research into this area, and it may be that hydrogel products are the future. Generally, when it comes to sport nutrition products, I would encourage triathletes and runners to use products that they're comfortable with and that work for them. And if you're interested in a video, I've linked one at the top of the screen where I talk about this in a bit more detail. Otherwise, that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you found it useful. If you did like it, then do give the video a like, as it really helps the channel out. And make sure that you subscribe to stay up to date with my videos. Otherwise, I will catch you next time. See ya.